In his recent speech, Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu suggested that in the coming years, the country may have to become a super Sparta. That is, a state capable of existing more or less isolated from the rest of the world. The Spartans and the Jews. At first glance, this comparison seems purely literary, and it would appear that there is no connection between these peoples. However, that's not the case. This connection does exist and is one of the mysteries of the sacred Jewish texts. It's a mystery because what is written about this connection in them is completely incomprehensible, and that's what we'll talk about today. When reading the book of Maccabees, which is dedicated to the Maccabean revolt that took place around 167 BCE and freed Israel at that time from Greek influence, during this uprising, as we know, the temple was liberated, which is commemorated by the holiday of Hanukkah. However, the book also discusses the political connections of the Jews during that period. And to our surprise, as we read, we come across a completely unexpected word. It is worth mentioning that this book was apparently written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew original has not survived to our time. What has reached us is the book of Maccabees already translated into Greek from the famous Septuagint translation. Nevertheless, the Hebrew original presumably existed, and there is evidence that it was preserved physically until the 5th century CE. It was physically preserved. Now, what do we read in the translation, which is now a double translation from Greek back into Hebrew? When we reach chapter 12, we come across a completely unexpected word in the text. So we are reading chapter 12, which tells us about the relations between Israel and Rome. It should be noted that at that time, Rome, the Roman Empire, was regarded as a completely friendly state, and throughout this book, it is portrayed as such. And suddenly we come across something unexpected, a word, and I will read this phrase in full because it deserves attention. And this is the matter of letters that Jonathan wrote to sons of Asparta. Asparta is none other than Sparta. Thus, there was correspondence between the Jews and the Spartans. It wasn't just a one-time thing. The book shows us that this correspondence continued for centuries. And it began with a letter sent by the king Arius I, who reigned in Sparta from 309 to 265 BC, to the high priest in Jerusalem, Onias I. This happened around 300 BCE, and in this letter it is said that the Spartans discovered an ancient document in their records, which explicitly states that the Jews and the Spartans are indeed brother peoples, both truly descended from the very same seed, the sacred seed of Abraham. This is in actual fact a rather strange and unusual message for us to consider. At that time, however, it apparently was not considered strange at all. In the book of Maccabees, we find a mention of this letter, which says that the Spartans want to reaffirm the ancient alliance that bound the Jews and the Spartans. And moreover, the Jews respond to them. In that same chapter, we see that there is a rather lengthy reply, which here the letter is quoted, as we can see, a letter to Onias from the Bnei Asparta, that is, from the Spartans. And then we see the response. We read it. Those who know Hebrew can read it themselves. The response says that the Jews are very glad to receive this letter. They remember the Spartans, constantly mention them in their prayers, and in their sacrifices they also speak of them, praying for prosperity and peace to be in that land. The Jews once again confirm the alliance between the countries and affirm their kinship ties. Moreover, the profound correspondence does not simply end there, it truly continues on and on. Further on the very same page, already within the subsequent chapter, specifically chapter 14, we unequivocally find that the ancient Spartans respond to the Jewish people regarding the significant and unfortunate news that the esteemed high priest Jonathan has indeed passed away. The news of this reaches Sparta. Here we see it says, and it was heard in Rome that Jonathan had died, and the news reached Sparta. That is, the Spartans received the message about the death of Jonathan the high priest, the son of Mattathiahu, who led the Maccabean revolt, and they write, and they mourned greatly. They became very sad. And then it goes on to describe their reaction to what happened. So what then? What we have here might simply be some rather strange piece of ancient world literature, which, in actual fact, carries nothing more than the simple idea that the author of this particular book decided to write extensively about a profound connection between the ancient Jews and the Spartans, and to emphatically claim that these are indeed brotherly peoples, both descending from a common, shared ancestor. Nevertheless, this particular hypothesis is the very simplest and, generally speaking, does not truly require any special or extraordinary effort whatsoever. At the same time, we know that those who trust the text of the Torah, who trust the text of the Tanakh, often arrive at much more interesting conclusions. Guided by these books of, so to say, legends, one can even make historical discoveries, as we can see. Perhaps the first example of historical discoveries based on legends is, of course, Troy. That is, ancient books contain certain information that should be taken seriously. I think this can be said with complete certainty today. So what is it that is written here? Scholars have suggested, and most scholars share this view today, that this was a kind of rhetorical device, that the Jews wrote to the Spartans about common roots simply in order to form an alliance with them, simply. This is the common ground for our alliance. We have shared roots, so let's be allied peoples and, for example, fight together. However, this doesn't quite hold up to scrutiny in our opinion, because the very same text in the book of Maccabees says that the Jews are not appealing to the Spartans for military assistance. They don't need it because they are protected by a force much greater than man. They are protected by the heavens. Thus, this alliance was not a military alliance in any sense, because quite simply, one of the parties stated that they did not need military assistance from the other. And the Spartans, for their part, never, of course, sought help from the Jews. In fact, as far as we know, they generally did not seek help from anyone in particular. Therefore, it is very difficult to assume that this alliance had any practical significance. And it leads one to think that these really were friendly peoples. And indeed, we see that the Spartans are sometimes mentioned alongside the Romans. But at that time, the Romans were a friendly empire, though the story with the Romans was somewhat different. Nevertheless, it is clear that on the political stage, the Spartans were a people quite close to the Jews and obviously very friendly, about whom it was said that we share common roots. How can we try to explain this if we don't simply say that it's a fabrication, but, for example, rely on Josephus Flavius, who provides us with further details about this document in Jewish Antiquities, the document the Spartans mention in their letter to the Jews, claiming they discovered this genealogical record which states that they and the Jews share a common origin. Josephus gives us further details. He describes the form of the letter, and he describes a seal with an eagle. And in fact, the way he describes this document is exactly how our contemporaries would describe the identifying features of a document, a completely real one existing in archives. In other words, he provides the necessary information for someone to locate this document in some kind of document storage or archive. And this is written about in a scholarly article that was published in the Journal of Hellenistic Studies, that is, a journal dedicated to Hellenistic research. Thus, we have yet another confirmation that this document was real. At the same time, it should be noted that we have no further confirmations. We do not have such documents from the Spartans, though to be fair, not much has survived from them anyway. Accordingly, we need to decide what to do with this, because at the very least, it is very interesting. What versions of the hypotheses have been proposed? One of the versions is that these people, the Spartans, are descendants of Abraham through one of the lost tribes. Specifically, the tribe of Simeon is suggested. Generally, lost tribes dissolved in other peoples and are natural candidates. The tribe of Simeon is one of the special tribes of Israel. Along with the tribe of Levi, they were distinguished by their extreme brutality. Today, this might sound strange when it comes to the tribe of Levi, who we think of only as servants in the temple. However, the beginning of this tribe's history was exactly like that. The tribe of Simeon, however, remained brutal. Much has been said about its character, and in particular, Jacob stated that they would be scattered. Indeed, Jacob the patriarch, when on his deathbed, mentioned the tribe of Simeon in exactly this way, that because of their brutality, because of their cruelty, they would be scattered. The description of the tribe of Simeon is extremely similar to the description of the Spartans, to the character of the Spartans. The tribe of Simeon also has a certain peculiarity. It practically disappeared. It disappeared during the wanderings in the desert, when after the Exodus, the Jewish people wandered in the desert for 40 years. Censuses were conducted, and in one census we see that the tribe of Simeon had 59,300 fighting men, but in the next census there were only 22,200. In other words, roughly 2/3 of this tribe simply disappeared in a short period of time. Of course, there are some attempts to explain this disappearance, some of which are related to the fact that there was a plague at that time. It killed people. Nevertheless, it wasn't 37,000 people who died as disappeared from the tribe of Simeon. Only men, by the way, but 24,000 in total. So the numbers still don't add up, and we have to assume that somehow, in some other way, they perished or died. There are also theories that they simply assimilated at an incredible rate into the tribe of Judah. Nevertheless, the mystery remains. Somehow, most of the tribe of Simeon, the majority of the tribe, simply disappeared during the wanderings in the desert. One possible theory, which aligns with what we later read about the fate of the tribe of Simeon, is that they simply migrated somewhere else and accordingly settled elsewhere. In reality, during their wanderings in the desert, the Jews were essentially a nomadic people, and nothing prevented a group from this nation from separating from the main body and going somewhere else, and in particular, coming to Greece. This might sound somewhat, perhaps, amusing, but chronologically it matches up. The time of the Exodus is somewhere around the year 1000 BCE, a little earlier. And the beginning of Spartan civilization also dates to around the year 1000 BCE, with their peak accordingly being around 600 BCE. So, in principle, this version is possible. However, we have no real facts, no factual basis to say that this version is in any way accurate. Yes, there are certain coincidences, and this is, of course, a possibility, but we have no arguments. Another theory appeals to the fact that there is a very specific mention of kinship between the Jews and the Spartans. It is said that they are descended specifically from the seed of Abraham. That is, not from the seed of Jacob, from whom all Jews descend, the grandson of Abraham, but specifically from Abraham himself. Accordingly, it is assumed that it is possible that the Spartans descended from Keturah, Abraham's concubine. They had children with Abraham, and these children were expelled from Israel by Abraham, so they will not be burnt by the burning coal of Isaac. And it is quite possible that they went somewhere and founded some civilizations. This is in fact what Jewish tradition believes. Jewish tradition does not think that these people founded Sparta. However, the theory suggests that this is exactly what happened. As far as we know, there are no other major theories about what is written in the book of Maccabees and what is mentioned by Josephus Flavius. Nevertheless, the fact remains. One of the sacred Jewish books, which was not included in the Tanakh, that is the 24 books of the Tanakh, and yet it is recognized by rabbis as an extremely important historical source. Rabbis teach from this book. It says that Jews and Spartans are brother nations. Undoubtedly, certain qualities of the Spartans, such as their uncompromising love for their homeland, their devotion to it, and their ability to unite in the face of a common enemy, would not hurt the Jews today. For now, this remains a mystery of our history.